Hey guys, Yips here coming at you with another video, and today we're going to talk about Warlock and Mythic Plus. Specifically, we're going to talk about Destro and Affliction in Mythic Plus just because I don't feel like Demonology is properly tuned right now in order to perform well in a Mythic Plus scenario at level 110, but Affliction and Destro are quite good in different scenarios, so we'll talk a little bit about the strengths and weaknesses of those two specs, but they're both good in different scenarios, and, you know, depending on the keystone level that you're running, you're going to want to pick one or the other, and also kind of depending on your group composition as well. So first we're going to talk about Destruction, then we'll move on over to Affliction. So if you're just looking for the Affliction point of view, just skip ahead in the video and you'll be able to find that. But either way, for Destruction, Warlocks, and Mythic Plus, Destro is very good at Burst AoE, Burst single target, and 2-target cleaving. That's just kind of how the spec works. A lot of your rotational stuff works around Cataclysm and Channel Demon Fire, which both have cooldowns, which is why when you're going into a Mythic Plus, you're going to kind of look for packs that generally don't live too long, so you can kind of get one rotation of these cooldowns off before the pack dies, and then you'll have it up again for the next pack, so you can just continually get good burst windows off. And then for single target, obviously your Infernal allows you to do a lot of extra damage, just based off the nature of how powerful Infernals are. And then outside of that, your damage isn't too great outside of the Infernals and your burst cooldowns. So what I recommend for Destro is, like, if you're doing a 15 where mobs aren't really living too long, Destro is an excellent option just because of how much burst it has and how much it's able to just kill those monsters before anything really happens. In higher level keystones, you'll find that's not the case, and other specs can perform better. In terms of gearing for your Destruction Warlock, I highly recommend you use Prototype. This trinket is busted. It is going to get nerfed, guaranteed. There's no way they let this trinket the way that it is right now. It is way too powerful. For me, in a Mythic Plus, it usually ends up doing 10% plus of my overall DPS, which is just insane. So I highly recommend you use this trinket if you have it. Outside of that, legendary choice, you definitely want to pick up Sephu's Secret. Really overpowered legendary in Mythic Plus for obvious reasons. That Bloodlust effect is just insane. And then, you know, outside of that, you have some options. You can use Lessons of Space-Time for that 3% damage. You can use Sindorize if you want a 15% boost every time you use your Infernal cooldown. You can use Feretory of Souls if you want consistent damage output, or Pride as if you need the survivability. There's a lot of options for that second legendary, and I'm going to leave that, guys, up to you depending on what sort of situation you like. For the purpose of this video, we're just going to use Space Time for that 3% extra damage. So in terms of gearing, just make sure you use that 4-piece, make sure you're using Lessons of Space Time or another legendary of choice with Sephu's Secret and Prototype. The ending trinket doesn't really matter too much. You can use a crid, you can use Pantheon, any sort of stat stick trinket or whatever you have that's best will work for you. Now, in terms of talent choices, we're going to be using Flash Over and Reverse Entropy. Those are pretty obvious choices. They just give you passive speed bonuses throughout the dungeons in terms of casting, so they're just very good in terms of overall damage output. We have Cataclysm and Channel Demon Fire. These are our bread and butter for the dungeon. They are our burst AoE cooldowns, as well as do a lot of damage on single target. And finally, rounding it all up, we have Grimoire of Sacrifice. Now, this thing is crazy. It gives us a personal interrupt when we sacrifice our Fell Hunter, which is really powerful, and also it just does a good amount of damage. So, let's talk about playstyle now. So in the Mythic Dungeon, you're going to start, obviously, you're going to take out your Fell Hunter, you're going to sack it, and you're going to get Spell Lock. Now, something cool that you can do with this is you can actually Havoc the Spell Lock because it's your ability. What do I mean by this? If you have two targets, let's say we're going to mark this guy with Skull and this guy with Square, and say that both of these guys are casting at the same time, you can actually Havoc Skull, and if you counterspell any other target, it will be copied onto your Havoc, meaning you can interrupt two targets at once, which is kind of cool and unique to Destruction. So that's just kind of a flavor thing that Destro can do. Now, obviously, onto the DPS rotation. When you get into a dungeon, the way that you're going to be doing your damage is you're going to start by proccing your Sephuz. After you proc your Sephu's Secret, you're going to Cataclysm into Channel Demon Fire. After you Channel Demon Fire, if you have Havoc available, you're going to use it. You're going to double Conflagrate, and then either Rain of Fire or cast a Chaos Bolt, depending on how many monsters there are. If there are 4 monsters, I would recommend Chaos Bolting. Anything more than that, I would just cast Rain of Fire and ignore the Havoc Chaos Bolts, okay? So that's what I would recommend doing. I'm going to show you guys this rotation in full speed so you get a really good idea of the damage potential that it can do, as well as just how it will flow in an actual dungeon. So I have my Sephuz off cooldown. I have all of my damage buttons up, so we're going to go ahead and do this. So proc my Sephuz, Cataclysm, Channel Demon Fire, Havoc, double Conflagrate, into double Chaos Bolt. And you guys can just see the crazy burst output damage potential that Destro has, and that's why you want the packs to die relatively quickly, because once you're out of those cooldowns, your damage really isn't that high, and you can see that it's dropping off very quickly, and this is why you want the monsters to die exceptionally quickly as a Destro Warlock, so when you're in that dungeon, you kind of get that big burst window off with your cooldowns, the trash pack dies, you move on to the next pack, you have your cooldowns back up again, and you can do another big burst. That's the strength of the Destro Warlock. Now, obviously, if you want more damage on a trash pack, you can use your Infernal. It does crazy AoE DPS as well as generates you a good amount of soul shards during its duration, so that's another really cool thing that you can do. So that's how Destro works on AoE. In terms of single target, the single target rotation is very basic. It's extremely straightforward. One thing worth noting is that your Suffuse actually does proc when you cast your Infernals. I'm going to show you guys what this looks like. Basically, your rotation is you just want to make sure you cast your Chaos Bolts with your backdraft charges. Outside of that, don't shard cap yourself and keep your abilities on cooldown. So you're going to start the pull by precasting a Cataclysm, summoning your Infernals, which will proc your Suffuse, channel Demon Fire, Conflagrate, Chaos Bolt, and now all you're going to have to do is make sure that you keep casting your Chaos Bolts with your backdraft charges, and that's going to lead you to doing as much damage as you possibly can. Keep channel Demon Fire on cooldown, keep Cataclysm on cooldown, keep Immolate on the target, and you're going to have a good time. Now, it's worth noting that outside of this Infernal cooldown, your single target is very low, so make sure in the dungeon that you always have this thing available for you whenever you get onto a single target scenario. And that's how Destro plays in Mythic Plus. It's quite a strong spec just because of the AoE potential that this thing has, so again, I highly recommend you pick this in dungeons that have a good amount of AoE, as well as the dungeon level isn't too high, so you're able to get those burst windows off consistently. Now we're going to move and talk about Affliction Warlocks. So Affliction Warlock is quite different than the Destro Warlock in Mythic Plus, in the sense that Affliction doesn't have a whole lot of burst AoE, but it has very good single target, and it has reasonable sustained AoE damage, as well as good cleave. So Affliction I would recommend picking in higher level dungeons when trash tends to live a little bit longer. I would also recommend for you guys to pick Affliction in dungeons that involve a lot of single target, just because it is really powerful with that Dark Glare cooldown. In terms of gearing for the Affliction Warlock, the gear set that I run is just going to be Hood of Eternal Disdain with Suffuse Secret, obviously using that prototype. Suffuse, obvious reasons again, it's that Bloodlust effect, but Hood of Eternal Disdain just gives you more shards, it gives you more damage. It's a very nice legendary to be running, so I highly recommend you guys use it as well. In terms of talent choices now, we're going to be using Deathbolt, Absolute Corruption, Phantom Singularity, Haunt, and Creeping Death. This is just a really good, the talents complement each other really well because you get a good amount of AoE from Absolute Corruption and Phantom Singularity, but you don't sacrifice too much single target because you're still keeping Haunt and Deathbolt. I believe these talents are going to be the ones that we're going to be using at 120 as well. Vile Taint is a reasonable option instead of Phantom Singularity, but I just found when I was in dungeons I was losing a lot of single target by picking Vile Taint, and Phantom Singularity tended to do a pretty good job on cleave AoE as well, and I just found overall I felt more comfortable with the Phantom Singularity cooldown. In terms of playstyle in Mythic Plus, it's pretty straightforward. All you're going to do is when you get to a pack is you're going to proc your Suffuse however you can as early as possible, but how I like to do is I precast a Seed of Corruption, proc my Suffuse, get my Agony on all of the targets, Phantom Singularity, Haunt, and then you're just kind of going to single target a pack down. So you're going to shove a bunch of UAs on one target with that Haunt, and then you're going to Deathbolt into that target for a big burst. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to focus down scary monsters in the dungeon, which is actually a really powerful thing that not a lot of classes can do. You can turn your AoE into single target burst. So what I mean by that is you can kind of use all of the shards that you're generating from these other monsters in order to plug it in onto one guy and do a lot of single target damage. Now again, like I've said, Affliction sustained damage isn't burst AoE isn't very good because you're kind of waiting for all of those agonies to ramp. You have to cast all of your UAs to get them ticking. You have to wait for your Phantom Singularity to do a lot of damage. You don't have anything that's just like bam, I'm going to hit really hard, really fast. It doesn't exist for Affliction right now, which is why it's a little bit weaker in lower level keystones. By the time you get your damage out, the trash packs tend to already be dead, and you haven't had time to get your dots to deal damage yet. So I highly recommend you guys pick Affliction on higher level keystones when mobs are going to be lasting a little bit longer, so you can consistently have that damage on AoE as well as on single target. Because if you guys see here, if I just want to attack these 4 monsters, you can see that my damage is actually quite good as long as I have enough time to deal damage to all of them. So I'm going to show you guys what I mean by that here. So I have enough time to deal damage. My damage can actually go quite high. But you saw it took me a while to ramp up here. I had to do 90k damage before I started, you know, peaking at high numbers. It wasn't early on that I had a lot of DPS like Destro was when I used my Channel Demon Fire and Cataclysm. So in Affliction, you want to make sure that mobs live a relatively long period of time in order to do good DPS. Now, in terms of single target capabilities, this is probably one of the best specs in the game for Mythic Plus. Your damage with Summon Dark Lair is absolutely out of this world, especially when you're bloodlusting. So just to quickly showcase that, we're going to go ahead and attack this Rebellious Fellord. So the way it's going to look is your team's going to be bloodlusting. You're going to cast a Haunt into Agony, Corruption, Phantom Singularity, cast as many unstable afflictions as you can before you run out of shards, Dark Glare, Death Bolt, then you're going to sit here and spam Shadow Bolt, and you can just see how high that single target DPS really is here. It's quite exceptional, definitely one of the best specs in the game at it, and hopefully you guys can appreciate how good being good at single target in Mythic Plus really is. It's actually quite an asset for a class to have good single target, as well as reasonable AoE. So yeah, that kind of wraps up this video. That's how you guys are going to be playing the 2 specs in Mythic Plus. It's also worth noting that Sacrilash is a reasonable legendary if your group needs a slow, as well as having to run Vile Taint if that's the case as well. Hopefully this helps you guys in your Mythic Plus journeys over the next couple weeks before the expansion releases. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments if you have any other suggestions in terms of future videos or stuff that I may have missed in this video. So thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you guys later.